Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm really excited to have Patrick Cozzi with me today, who is leading the charge at Cesium, which is now part of Bentley Systems. And they had a really intriguing developer conference just recently. And today we're going to just do a little bit of a recap, get some takeaways from both of us around how the conference went. And as a side, we also work together on the Metaverse Standards Forum on the board of directors. So we'll probably hit that as one of our topics as well. But let me pass it off to Patrick for an intro from him. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mike, and hi, everybody. Really excited to be here on the podcast. So, as Mike said, I'm the founder of Cesium, and I'm the chief platform officer at Bentley Systems. So, I'm leading our open developer platforms for the community to build digital twins for the built and natural environment. Then I've done a lot of work with Kronos and OGC and the Metaverse Standards Forum to try to advance open standards. So, looking forward to chatting today.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Patrick. So yeah, your work in Cesium goes back, well over a decade. I'm kind of curious, it seems like that came out of a research project, but maybe you can fill in a little more background on kind of how you got started and, why 3D tiles and what led to, where we are today.
Sure. So I was working at an aerospace company called AGI, and we were doing a C++ desktop app that was doing computing satellite orbits and then visualizing that in 3D, showing the globe spinning, and the satellites orbiting. And then around 2011, WebGL came out, and JavaScript was becoming what I'll call fast enough to maybe do 3D in the browser. So we looked and said, hey, can we do the type of aerospace 3D viz that we're doing in this desktop app? Can we go do it on the web? And can we also do it in such a way that's a reusable library for other developers? So that's how we got started. But then when we made it open source, that's when we learned that, hey, we weren't just in aerospace, but we were in geospatial and construction and all these other markets.
Yeah, no, it's very fascinating. And, from my own perspective at Super DNA, we've been doing kind of digital twin on the product side and kind of small focused, like individual objects. And we're starting to kind of explore this whole, world, for lack of better term, and no pun intended. But there's really a lot of interesting things happening in geospatial. And especially, I think, in the last few years where you've seen these kind of larger data sets really becoming available on the web, and you can really essentially stream the entire globe. I was personally blown away with Flight Simulator. I think it was 2020 when they did this whole revamp, and all of a sudden you can kind of fly anywhere within the game and load in, essentially what are 3D tiles. And it's pretty cool that this data exists and that Cesium is making it really accessible for other folks to develop that, not just into games, but into any type of business use case, really like lowering the barrier to entry. And that's kind of what I've been seeing as an outsider. But I'm curious on your take. Like, is that, the design of the system? Is that what you intended? Or is this kind of what the market has demanded and you guys ended up building?
Well, there's no doubt so much of our roadmap and our vision has been guided by the community. And, it's fun doing the open source and you're out there on GitHub and on the community forum and you're seeing all these new ideas and people just picking it up and showing us what they're doing. But at the core, we started with terrain and then came point clouds and came 3D buildings. These were all at massive scale, lots of data. And we started looking at it. We're like, well, you kind of have the same approach to each one with spatial subdivision and hierarchical level detail and streaming. And that's where 3D tiles came from, right? Instead of writing, the same system over and over, we said, hey, we can kind of have one runtime system and then many different pipelines to generate that data. And then, yeah, you mentioned both on the product side and looking at the digital twins. A lot of what we're doing there with 3D tiles is also very applicable just to any 3D model, right? It could be like a very detailed sneaker, for example.
Yeah, actually, I always say exciting, and maybe this will be off topic. We can discuss a little in more detail later. But one of the things that's interesting, as far as kind of Chronos and standards go, is it seems like we're going to be trying to bridge the gap between a glTF individual file and a 3D tile. That's kind of a whole complex scene with this new like GLX format. And so I don't know if you want to get into that now or talk about the conference first, but that's one thing that popped into my mind that I think is fascinating and a nice new emerging opportunity.
Yeah, why don't we touch on it? And it was a topic at the conference, right? Because we were fortunate
Mhm.
to host a glTF ecosystem forum at the Cesium conference, which I thought was so cool. Look, it's fascinating, right? Because in the early days, if you go back like 2012, 2013, I mean, I was working on glTF and 3D tiles at the same time, right? And I was trying to be very careful where I wasn't trying to put geospatial stuff into glTF, right? Like we had a
Mhm.
need for glTF because we needed to do aircrafts or ground vehicles or satellites, like those types of 3D models. And we wanted to use 3D tiles for that larger environment. Hence, 3D tiles is basically, a spatial subdivision of glTF. Now here we are in 2025, and you're starting to see some of the things we did for 3D tiles to allow for that spatial subdivision, to allow those external references. They're broadly useful outside of geospatial. So you start saying, okay, well, where should these levels of abstraction be?
Mhm.
And some of the stuff we did for geospatial really should be deeper in the levels of abstraction so you can reuse them in other markets more easily and more obviously. And then I like that, right, as Cesium, because I go, well, geez, the more adoption you get, the more ecosystem and the more tools that are built around that, and everyone just wins. So yeah, we are trying to figure out those right levels of abstraction now between glTF and 3D tiles, and then this concept of maybe having this intermediary glX to allow the external references, is potentially a good option. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the scene composition idea has been something we've been kicking around internally at Kronos. Feels like for a long time, like the last 2 years, maybe 3 years. And the name kind of changes and goes back and forth. But I like the concept of being able to bring multiple products together, right? So, from an e commerce perspective, which is kind of where I spend a lot of my time within Kronos, is figuring out how can we get products to kind of work together nicely and show up potentially in the same lighting condition, right? So it's one thing if you do a hero asset or configurator, you can kind of control everything on its own. But if we're trying to do something that's more of a scene configurator, or bring a whole room together, there's questions that have been open questions, I'd say, around how do we actually take that light and illuminate another object, right? So a lamp with a self-contained point light sitting next to a couch, from my furniture background. There's these kind of interoperability pieces, or if an animation on one thing, like the light switch on the wall, can trigger the 3D model, like that could be pretty interesting. And it starts to go into these more game like interactive experiences, and being able to just deliver those on the web, I think would be pretty impressive. So yeah, I'm excited about that as a future development.
Definitely, definitely. And then I know we'll get to the season conference, but the SIGGRAPH conference, right, is coming up next month. So I expect there'll be lots of discussion about this there as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, so to kind of get back to our original topic, then I would like to go back and talk a little bit about the conference that just happened, and this, we were discussing a little beforehand, but maybe you can fill in the audience with context. This is the first larger scale developer conference that you guys have put on under the Bentley name. I understand that you've been meeting with users in the past, but this is kind of taking it to the next level. So I may be kind of curious, going back a few years, to what was the very first meetup like, and did you see yourself kind of in a few years already running a big conference like this, or how did it kind of come about?
Wow. Well, yeah, I mean, certainly some of the earlier gatherings that we did would be something like a birds of a feather at a SIGGRAPH or a meetup. And then a year ago, we held a federal technical exchange meeting in Philadelphia for about 70 people. And then that kind of gave us the confidence that we could do something bigger and we could do it across all the communities that we serve. And hence the vision for the Cesium Developer Conference that we had in Philadelphia last month, with the intent really being to celebrate the contributions of the 3D geospatial community. So, Bentley was the host and the organizer, but we really wanted to bring the community to tell the community story. So we had a little over 400 attendees, and then we had 101 speakers, and 87 came from the community. So I think that kind of showed our intent that we wanted to have that, everyone be able to contribute. And then, from my own experience there, of course, I've met so many people in the community over the years, and we engage, every day right online. But to have that many people together in person and to feel the energy and just how everyone just felt like so positive and so welcoming, it was really unique and surreal and almost, I don't want to call it intimidating, but like for me, I was like, wow, I'm like, people have built careers, products, and businesses on the technology, both the open source, the open standards, and then our commercial products. And I said, wow, like that's an awesome privilege, and we have to do everyone right by that.
Yeah, no, I think, and that's a really impressive number that like 87% of the content was essentially coming back from the community. And, for myself, kind of coming into this space, like working now in geospatial projects, it's really relatively new for us, probably the last, 6 to 9 months or so. Seeing all the different inspirations and areas that people were using as these kind of presentations, and a lot of them were pretty quick, which was actually kind of a nice format. I feel like in some ways it was drinking from the fire hose. There was just lots of content, and some of the lightning talks that were like 5 minutes back to back for 2 hours or so. I was taking a lot of notes and getting a lot of inspiration. But I think, any one of these topics, if you wanted to, could go into like a full, 30 to 45 minute discussion. And it was nice to be able to follow up with folks too, to get that kind of additional level of detail. But from a just, content perspective, it seemed like there was a lot, like way more than just the 2 day conference. And so it was great, again, from me, from that perspective coming in, looking to learn as much as I could about what are the opportunities. My takeaway was that there's tons of opportunities, and people are already doing some really interesting, cool projects that, continue to have needs for what we're building, not just within 3D tiles and Cesium, but also beyond that with Metaverse Standards and Kronos. And so it's cool to see that people are putting these tools to use and creating some really great use cases.
Look, I'm glad that you saw all the opportunities, and I felt really for this entire run with Cesium that there's been more opportunity than we, the collective community, have been executing on, which is a great challenge, right? Because it means that there's so much for us to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of that, I guess what do you see as next? Like, what's the evolution of, not just this conference, but kind of the technology in general? What's around the corner?
Yeah, well, one thing that we announced that open in morning was some of the 3D mesh reconstruction, as well as the Gaussian splats, and then the AI feature detection in cesium ion. And I was excited for that to be announced because, that's like kind of a concrete example showing how Bentley and cesium together is really good for the cesium community because we're bringing these new features out to the community. The Gaussian splats I'm particularly excited about, right? I mean, there's so many things there where it's like, wow, what it can do with like really thin objects like electrical lines, how they come through a lot better for the reconstruction, as
Yeah.
well as the reflected and refractive surfaces. So can't wait to see everything the community builds with it. And then also having that go into 3D tiles and becoming, an open standard, I think would be great as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a really interesting topic. And actually, that leads me to a little bit Metaverse Standards Forum because we've run, or you've run, a few successful town halls on this very topic. And I think that's been a great, model for us as a community, right? The Metaverse Standards Forum's been around for, I think, 3 or 4 years now. And it was basically a more accessible, I would say, version of organizations like Kronos that really focus on producing standards. This was more open to low barrier to entry cost wise and trying to get more people providing feedback and talking about their use cases. And it works in conjunction with some of the standards bodies like Kronos. But I felt like the town hall was really this coming together of a lot more folks. Like, you can see the registration numbers, and it's like there's thousands of members as part of MSF. But normally on our weekly calls, there's a few dozen folks, which is good participation, but it's not what we saw at the town hall where there were hundreds of people. So I'm curious, how did that format come about, and what do you see as the future of engagement? Are we going to do more town halls? Go ahead, I'll let you fill in the questions there.
Yeah, look, I'm really excited by the Metaverse Standards Forum and having this forum that brings together the organizations and the standards defined organizations to help, figure out where standards should go. And then, like you said, collaborate with the STOs through the work. It's been awesome. As we started to see the momentum for Gaussian splats and just all the research papers, and then folks just prototyping their engines, and there's so much on social media, we said, well, we should start this conversation around what is timing to consider an open standard. And when we put out the call to do, an open to anyone virtual town hall, I mean, it was only like 3 weeks notice or so. Like it was very quick that we put that together. And just the amount of interest that we got from presenters. I think the first town hall we did back in January might have had 15 different organizations presenting, and then over 400 attendees. Just that signal right there, I think, was very positive to
Mhm.
show the potential for Gaussian splats. But we also were able to have just very open dialogue around what are the different techniques around handling specular or compression or animation, and what is the right timing to consider open standards. Because if you're too late, you're going to fragment the market. But if you're too early, you could stifle innovation, right? So how do you
Mhm.
kind of look at that curve?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. And yeah, for that content, I think it was about a 4 hour session, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But it was great to see there were, over 400 people most of the time, I think. Maybe people were popping in and out throughout the day. But I was there most of the time, and seeing that, number of attendees, never so large, was pretty impressive. And the content itself, too, was pretty diverse. So it was fascinating to see how folks are using it in different areas. And as you mentioned, I think Bentley was talking about using it for thin features, right? Like some of the power lines or cell phone towers. But then others were using it for completely different things, right? There was one company that I think was Arrival.space had built out this like metaverse essentially, where you could communicate with other folks and just walk through these different digital recreations. And then after that, I kind of have had fun adding some of my own splats to that platform and just checking out other places around the world, right? There are a bunch of forests in Japan, and the Gaussian splats like really give you a different interactive I don't know. It's hard to describe or explain, right? Because it's immersive, but it's not necessarily like it's photorealistic, but it's not 3D. I don't know. I can't really describe it well, other than I can say I feel like a sense of presence, even doing it outside of VR. Of course, I have a lot of VR headsets, so I love being able to see these splats like in that first person view. But even just looking at it on a computer monitor really brings a site to life in a way that is kind of different than anything else that's out there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Look, I think Gaussian splats have a ton of potential, and just the fact that they're inherently point clouds, which makes things like editing easier. I mean, it's a very bright future.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. All right, so one like following up or closing comment on the show itself, right? I'd like to get your perspective on one was it a success? I would say yes, but from your perspective, and what comes next? Is there going to be another one next year? Is this an annual conference? How can folks that are watching get involved, or maybe submit a presentation for next time?
Yeah, I mean, I felt the conference was very successful in that just the energy that you felt there was really good. We do intend to do this every year. As we figure out the dates and the venue, we will be putting it out on social and emailing everyone who came. So I'd say stay tuned on that. Won't be long.
Very, very cool. Yeah. Do you think you need to expand to a different, larger venue? Felt like the hotel was pretty well spaced. Maybe some of the floors being, talks located up an elevator ride was an inconvenience. But I don't know. I'm curious. Like, do you see this being like 1,000 people next time, and you're going to need much bigger space, or how would that? How do you consider those things?
I'm curious for your input here because I feel like again there was magic in the DNA and the energy and the positivity, and like people weren't on their cell phones when they were at a talk, and
Mhm.
everyone would just go up to each other and get to know each other. It was really cool. So I think the number one thing is we want to keep that magic. Could it go from 400 to 1,000? I mean, maybe, but I only want to grow it as fast as we can maintain that culture. So what do you think?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that's a good target, right? To try not to grow it too aggressively, even if there's, a lot of interest out there. I think trying to, strategize how the format gets spaced out. I think one of the pieces of feedback that I heard from folks was that if you were trying to look at sessions in different tracks or different rooms, then it was hard timing wise because the speakers were kind of just going one after another. I didn't run into that because I was staying in one particular track that I was interested in, but I can appreciate how there's so much great content that if you add even more content, there's only so much time for folks to observe and absorb everything. So yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult challenge because if you want to continue to grow it, which I think you're going to get more people and you're going to get more content and more participation, doing that in a way that keeps that feel of being able to just chat with people and also feel like you don't miss too much content. It's one of those problems that I don't know if there's actually a good solution for, but hopefully there's recordings coming out for a lot of this, and I think that is maybe the best alternative, right? If you can't make it in person.
Yeah, so the recordings from this conference will be out this summer. So for any talks that you missed, or for folks who weren't able to attend the conference, there were talks on everything from subsurface to aerospace to architecture. So please check those out.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. So, just as we get closer to time, I wanted to leave it open for any additional topics that we might have missed or that you wanted to cover. Anything on your mind that you'd like to kind of chat about?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about advancing open standards, we're doing a lot with 3D tiles, right? We spoke about Gaussian splats. The other stuff that we're working on is temporal 3D tiles. So this idea that you have, for example, a geospatial terrain, and then over time that terrain may be changing, like it's a construction site and they're moving the dirt around. And then how do you very efficiently have essentially deltas from time zero to time one? So you can animate, you can do measurements, that type of stuff. Aguala-san from EarthBrain actually presented this at the conference. We've been working on it with them. So that's an area that we're advancing 3D tiles that we're interested in people's input on.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And then we're almost at this point too, where we have a bit of a fraction of, you get the Gaussian splats that are essentially point clouds, right? So you have like point information, which maybe that's a little easier to get deltas on because not all of those points are necessarily going to be changing every time. And or you also have these kind of triangle meshes and textures, which feels to me anyway like it might be a little more difficult to change track unless you really break up the meshes into individual components. um, but yeah, it's going to be a fascinating topic. Is there one technique that you guys are preferring when it comes to temporal playback?
Yeah, so right now the temporal playback has been focused on terrain, which typically comes in the form of height maps. So, for example, if you have a construction site terrain, well, they might fly a drone to survey the whole site at the beginning, but then on any given day, they just have some machines going over a small part. So, really,
Yeah.
the locality is quite good because from the delta times, most of it doesn't change at all. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally. That makes sense. And if you're going to run a drone every time something changes, you don't necessarily want to scan that whole area either, right? So I think that's a good place to start. Very cool. Well, all right. Well, thanks for joining us today, Patrick. This was always fun to catch up with you and, hopefully, give some more awareness for the conference and the content coming out. I'll try to add some links to that as it comes out this summer. And we look forward to connecting again soon.
Cool. Appreciate it, Mike. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks. Bye bye.